At Mitsooz, we connect you with artists by going beyond the finished piece and into the story behind it. I'm Starah Dixon, founder of Mitsooz, and these are our studio dialogues. Conversations with artists and creators that reveal the process, inspiration, and personal narratives behind their work. Today, we're featuring Kevin Cross, a New York City-based painter originally from Limerick, Ireland. His work explores the tension between atmosphere and structure through layered gradients and geometric forms. His paintings invite viewers into quiet, immersive spaces where order and openness exist in balance. So now, without further ado, our studio dialogue with Kevin Cross.
Hi, I'm Kevin Cross. Welcome to my studio here in New York City. I'm an artist, a painter from Ireland. I grew up in Limerick in Ireland. I moved to the States when I was young. 1996, I moved to San Francisco. And then 2006, I moved to New York City. My formative years, I painted in high school, studied painting in high school. But for various reasons, I ended up going to business school instead of art school. And I didn't pick up painting again until later in life. And actually, in 2006, when I moved to New York City, that's when the creative juices started to flow again. And I moved with the intention of going to New York, taking some classes, learning about art, starting an artistic experience. And that's what I've done.
That's really cool. So just take me a little bit back. What about New York inspired you?
I visited a few times. I lived in San Francisco, and I was in San Francisco actually in the 90s, which was right in the dot-com boom. And even though all of that was going on, there was still a lot of creativity going on in San Francisco, a lot of art, a lot of music. And so I got to experience a lot of that. I did actually pick up a paintbrush in San Francisco a little bit, and I started dabbling with oils a bit. Nothing too serious, but when I made the decision to move to New York, I knew that this was the center of the art world, and I knew that I wanted to be a part of it. I knew I wanted to take some classes, and I knew that I wanted to start an artistic practice. So that was my intention.
Just so that I can get into your creative process, like what does a typical day in the studio or art mode look like for you?
Like a lot of artists in New York City, I also have a day job. So my practice primarily takes place in the evenings and on weekends. I'm very lucky that I have my studio here. I work from home, so I've got no commute. I get home from work and I'm straight in the studio. I usually work on 2 to 3 pieces at a time. I have a couple of pieces on the go. Just if I get stuck or if I need something, just a change of pace, I'll go back to a piece that I'm just beginning, or I'll finish off a piece. Or, that's just the way I operate. But my practice, I'll spend 3 to 4 hours in the evening working on stuff, and then at the weekends too. So my wife, if she knows where to find me, she knows where to find me pretty much all the time. I'm right here.
Okay, so that's interesting. You usually work in 2 to 3 pieces at a time. Is there a reason for that, or is just as you go with the flow?
It's pretty much as I go with the flow. It was a suggestion from a teacher of mine. I took classes at a Hunter College here in New York, and I was really fortunate to be able to study under Robert Swain and Carrie Moyer. They're 2 very prominent New York artists. Particularly Robert Swain, his work was a big influence on mine. He's a color theorist and works primarily with color gradients and so forth. So he was a big influence. But I remember him saying to me, you should work on 2 to 3 paintings at a time. That keeps the flow going. If you get stuck on something, you can just switch lanes. I mean, sometimes work will be difficult. A painting will fight you. But if that happens and it's too much for you to get through, you can say, all right, you know what, Mr. Painting, I'm just going to go over here and ignore you for a little bit. I'm going to start on something else. And then you always return to a painting. Sometimes you need to take a break. You need to figure stuff out in your head and then retackle it.
Would you say that you've noticed a specific time frame that it takes you for you to like remove yourself from the painting so that you can just come back more inspired?
Not necessarily. It really situational. It depends on the painting. It could be a matter of hours or it could be much longer than that.
And with regards to your art, like you definitely do, take in and work with gradients. So why did you choose to do this?
I was working with grids. I'm a grid person. I'm very attracted to grids. I always have been. And actually, going back to where I grew up in Limerick, I'm also attracted to architecture and grids and street flows and maps. And those kind of things just fascinate me, that sort of structure. But growing up in Limerick is actually, it's a Georgian city. And it's the only city in Ireland, even though it's 800 years old, it's the only city that has a grid system, street system. It's kind of like a little mini New York. I don't know why that is, but it's whatever, for whatever reason, it's a grid system. So I was always very responsive to that. I just like, I knew where I was at any moment. I really enjoy that control of the grid. So grids have always been a part of my life. And now obviously I'm in New York where everything is just, a grid. To get back to your question, the gradients, I started with creating gradients using a grid system rather than the flowing gradients that I use today. And actually the paintings that are right behind me are older paintings that I started using gradients during the pandemic. And this is one of them. You can see, I don't know if you can see there, but it's basically made of a pixel grid system that I use for creating the grids. And this one right here, again, is the same thing. This line here is all pixel, but then you can see that I've started to develop the gradients that I use today with the washes. So I think the gradient came about during the pandemic. Like a lot of people, I wasn't working, so I spent a lot of time in my head, a lot of time in my studio, and the idea of change and flow and a structured flow came to me, and I started working with those concepts. And so that's where the gradient came about.
Okay, so I do know that you spend quite some time in your studio. Whenever you want to step away from work or reset creatively, like where do you go to clear your mind?
Oh, I live right by Central Park. So I spend a lot of time in there. I've got two little dogs, and I'm in the park every morning at 6:30. So I'm in there. I've got my headsets in. I'm listening to my music, but I'm also very aware of what's going on. I'm taking everything in. I'm watching the light change. And that's how I start my day. It really clears my mind. I spend a lot of time thinking and even not necessarily planning a painting, but figuring things out and sort of thinking about problems that I'm having in a work or whatever. And I'm sort of contemplating and reflecting on what's going on in the studio and also what's going on in my life too. It's a place where I clear my mind. And yeah, so I get a lot of steps in, and I'm very fortunate that I can do that. I just step outside my door and, grab the dogs and away I go. That's how I start my day. And also if I'm stuck, if there's a place where I need to step away from something for a while, from a painting or whatever, yeah, it's right there. So that's what I do.
So when it comes to your art, they are clearly very distinct and just gorgeous, like masterpieces. So when it comes to people taking it in, what do they usually say to you about your artwork?
I get a lot of questions. I mean, with my artwork, I really want people to come close. I feel like what I'm working on right now, that unofficially I call it the Window series, the series I'm working on. It actually has a title called The View. It feels to me like I'm working on a window series where I'm imposing a structure frame on top of an atmospheric background, or I don't want to call it a background because I feel like what I want people to do is I'm inviting people into my space, my atmospheric creation, the gradients that I've created. I want people to ask me why that is. Where did the window come from? A lot of the time, that's what people bring up is like, why the gradient? I've talked about that. I want to create like an atmosphere. And then with the window, like I say, I want to invite people into my work, invite people in to experience that atmospheric creation from the gradient. And I want to use the window as like a threshold. So it contains that atmosphere, but it also reveals it. It's a frame, it's a structure, but it's also an invitation.
Okay. So where do your ideas or visual directions usually begin? Is it like emotion, environment, structure, or memory?
It's all of those. It's definitely the environment. I'm definitely inspired by New York City. I'm inspired by my time in the park. I spend a lot of time outside, mostly with the dogs, but also just by myself. I've always been really inspired by my surroundings, no matter where I am. I'm kind of like a sponge. I just sort of take in not just the people, but the architecture, the lines, the light, the reflections of light through windows and so forth. So yeah, a lot of it comes from outside sources. There's also my inner mind and that sort of clarity and peace that I'm seeking. I get that from walking. I get that also from sort of entering like a meditative space from walking. But also, I always listen to music when I'm walking or in addition to when I'm painting. It's a big part of my life and a big part of my work is this music that I listen to. And so that's another huge influence.
Just wanted to throw it in there. Did you want to share what kind of genre, like as far as music, you go towards?
Yes, I'd love to. I think it's a big part. Like I said, I grew up in the 90s, and I was fortunate in the 90s. We had this sort of like a cultural experience where people started going to raves, and you would get on a bus at 10 o'clock at night. You had no idea where you were going. Nobody knew where we were going, and we'd end up at a castle on top of a hill, middle of nowhere, with this music experience, and everybody had this collective experience. It was just a very sort of like a meditative experience. It wasn't like going to a nightclub or a party or anything like that. It was just sort of felt more sort of cerebral, or no, it's not cerebral, but just sort of more meditative than that. It was a very collective kind of thing. So that's where my music background came from. I just grew up listening to this sort of minimal electronic. People call it EDM these days. I tend to call it house or techno, just because I'm older, I guess. But that's what I listen to when I paint. That's what I listen to when I walk, and it's very repetitive. It's very minimal. A lot of people hate it, but it just gets me in the space to the flow when I work. Fun fact about me is I am what's known as a bedroom DJ. I have a whole kit here, if like right in front of me, if the camera was here, you could see this. I've got this whole DJ controller, speakers, headphones, all this kind of set up here. And so what I do is I create my own mixes of the music that works for me. And then that's what I use to paint, or that's what I listen to when I walk or when I paint. It's like a symbiotic thing. Like I make this music, I paint to the music, informs my painting and gets me in that space where I can just flow.
That's really cool because it's kind of like atmosphere on atmosphere because like you're in the room creating your own atmosphere as you're creating the atmosphere within your painting too.
Yeah, and it helps me create what I'm looking to create, that sort of meditative space. I mean, I don't consider myself a meditative person, but I consider my process as very meditative. It's repetitive. The gradients that I put down is a very methodical, repetitive, intentional process. It's a beginning. It's the foundation where I'm putting down this open, spatial, atmospheric grounding for the painting. And so the music just really, really gets me in that in that space.
So with that mix, would you say that when it comes to painting, you work towards an outcome or you discover the work as it like unfolds?
With the gradients, I'm definitely work intuitively. My work used to be very intuitive, and it made it very hard to work in a series because I would just go off on all sorts of different tangents. But that was part of my learning curve. But now there's definitely an intention. I have my artistic voice, if you want to call it. I have my style, and I want to go in a direction. I want to take this window / the view series. I want to take it in certain directions. So I have an intention when I start a painting, but the gradient that I put down at the beginning is very intuitive. I use a very limited palette to begin with. I have like 3 colors that I start with, and it's a basic sort of gradient, but then I'll add in a little hint of this here and there, depending on what kind of atmosphere I'm trying to create and lay down. And then later, the structure will be placed on top of the gradients. And that's more sort of the controlled, intentional part of the painting. The gradient is more sort of the intuitive. Sometimes I can go in directions I haven't really intended. It's kind of a balance. A lot of the time, then I don't do a whole lot of pre-planning per se. I don't do a lot of photoshopping work or whatever. Occasionally I will, but there will be times when I have definite intention. Okay, this is where this next piece is going. And then there's also times when the previous piece that I've just done will inform my next work. It's kind of like it's a journey for sure.
And how do you know that this is something that you want to continue to work upon?
Well, this series for sure, it's probably the most fulfilling series I've done so far. There was a series before this that was really led up to this new series. It was called My Structured Flow, as the title would suggest, more sort of loose, kind of compositionally. And then I came about with the Windows series when I realized I wanted my work to be less about a composition and more sort of about an experience for the viewer, and an invitation to come in to not necessarily my world, but sort of my headspace, my experience, just to take that moment out of their day or their time, just to sort of experience that sort of stillness and calm and that meditation headspace that I get into when I paint. It's kind of like, how do you know when your journey is done or when to take a left and a right? You know where you want to go, and other times you're just going to choose a direction. With the Windows series, I introduced the moving away from the composition. I don't know when I'm going to be done with this series. I think there's a lot of room, a lot of places I want to go with it. I'm thinking I want to work with this series would work really well with different scales, introducing different elements. And then I think eventually I have this desire to maybe go into the realm of installations and have somebody really step through and physically experience that sort of invitation into that immersive experience rather than just like a visual entry into an atmosphere.
That actually really is really cool. So I cannot wait for that.
It might be a little while, but
Mhm.
but yeah, that's where my mind is thinking of different avenues.
And so just to know also for you though, like what would be three words that you would use to describe yourself?
Well, I'm definitely reflective. I think I'm very observant. My uncle, a few years back when I started painting, I was telling him, he was like, "Well, what are you up to in New York?" I was telling him, "Oh, I've started painting and blah blah blah." And he was like, "Yeah, I knew you would." And I was like, "How did you know that?" And he's like, "Because when you were a kid, you used to sit and you would observe everything that was going on, and I knew then you had a creator, And so yeah, so observant is definitely a word. What did I say? Reflective, observant. I think intentional too. I'd like to think that my work always has an intention.
And what would be the three words that you would use to describe your art?
Spatial, atmospheric, and meditative.
So we're currently in May 2026. What would be a goal artistically that you have that you would want to get accomplished within about like 2 to 5 years?
Well, I talked about working with scale. Like I said, I'm fortunate to be able to work from home, and I'm fortunate to be able to be in such a art-centric world of New York City. It is expensive to live here, though, so I have a limited space to work in. So in 2 to 5 years, I want to have a bigger studio. That's one of my obvious goals, and I want to work with scale. I want to create larger works and see where that takes me. That's one goal. I also want to increase my audience. I want to be more, I think doing dialogues like this is very important for me to express who I am, where my work comes from. And so I want to do more of this kind of work as well. Yeah.
As we're going through this part, what is something that you hope that your art will leave behind, like that you would be able to leave behind through your artwork?
I would like to know that I was able to create experiences for people, create like reflective experiences for people, maybe just interrupt this fast-paced culture that we're in right now and that I'm part of as well, is doom scrolling culture. Be able to say that I created these emotional engagements for people, and I was able to bring people into this space of quiet meditation and stillness and just to be aware.
When it comes to the colors that you choose, why do you choose these colors?
Like I said, I start with, they're actually right here, my three basic colors. I have three colors. I have one color that I love is this Payne's gray. And I mix that with, I have a couple of like a parchment and a unbleached titanium. I mix those together and it comes out with this beautiful colonial blue that you can do a whole lot with. And then after that, choosing colors to add to that base, it really depends on what kind of mood I want to create, whether I'm going to use a cool color, a warm color, whatever. But I always start with my basic three colors. That sort of gives me that's my platform. And that's sort of like my secret formula that I came up with. And just I'm happy. I'm comfortable with that. And then after that, then I introduce what seemed right from then. And I spend a lot of time mixing color and coming up with the right color emotions, and also adding mediums. I use acrylics, so they dry pretty quickly. So I have to use a lot of mediums to keep that surface wet so I can create that gradient. It takes a lot of trial and error, and it takes a lot of time to do that until I'm satisfied with the result. Yeah, it's a process, and it really just depends on where I am in the series and where I am emotionally, and.
And to close us off for today, is there an interesting or fun fact about yourself that you want to share?
Yeah, speaking of color, I'm colorblind, so I like to make things difficult for myself. I'm the artist who works with color who has trouble naming the colors and distinguishing the colors, but it's a challenge that I've taken on board.
Well, it works out beautifully. And with that, thank you so much, Kevin, for opening your practice over to us and for your generosity in sharing your work and your narrative too. So looking forward to continuing to see you.
Thank you for having me.